Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen. Um, Nice to be virtually meeting you all. I can't see your faces, but my name's Stephen, and I've been leading for Human First Customer Success. So really trying to help people get the best out of their NLU, NLG, LLM solutions. And my background's kind of the last decade building bots of all shapes and sizes. I think I started really seriously building bots around 2013, just when I was working for IBM at the time. We kind of gone through the second wave of chatbot technologies. The first wave being kind of bag of words and UEMA and Prolog grammars and all that good stuff that we'd all played around with. And then sometimes around there, 2011, 2012, 2013, the advent of these new embedding-based, cloud-based systems from, Dialogflow and Watson and Microsoft Lewis, etc., Rasa, that really started to move away from that kind of rule-based approach to more a probabilistic way of trying to understand what the user was saying to us and have really powerful conversations back again. And that kind of led to the rise of the conversational designer role. The idea that, automation was going to move people from doing maybe answering the phones to kind of designing how the phones were to be answered. And that's the journey we've all been on. And I think that kind of second phase lasted until about 2022, when really we've had the technology thrown up in the air again with large language models, and we're having to react. And I was lucky enough to lead the conversational practice at IBM in UK and Ireland. We got to do a lot of the reference projects with very large organizations. I was on the PS side, as they really try to work out, what is this designer role? What does it need to do? And really grappling with what was a very imperfect technology then. And I see very much we're starting as conversation designers to come through and face the same sort of challenges with a very new large language model based approach. What's changed? What's the same? How we have to adapt. And really conversational designers often have a background from translation or copywriting or maybe UX design. And those are perhaps some of the areas which change the most as we move into something that, instead of relying on pre-canned responses, is now coming up with that on the fly. What's the really crucial parts of dialogue design, discourse analysis, and NLU design and NLG design that really is going to sustain that role going forward. So my aim for this talk is to talk about some of the things that have changed with LM, some of the things that remain very the same, and how to really listen to what that technology is telling you about your data. Because if you ignore that, you're likely to build in a way which you get frustrated that bot isn't doing the way things that you want it to. And I'm going to run some.
Interrupt. We're getting some comments that the slides are not updating. Are we supposed to be on the intro slide?
Yes.
Ah, okay. Well then, all good.
It's an intro, but if there will be slides, I promise. So hopefully the presentation today, you get to see some real examples of how necessary it is to really agree what your large language model chatbot means. So the trouble with conversation design is that most conversation design projects fail. And that's because we don't really get a free hand. The business says, these are the most easy things to integrate. We think the user wants to do this. Could you please build something over this? And we do all the great things. We do really good user experience analysis. We do ideation. We do really good response design. And I'm sure those are great responses. But in the middle, we're kind of missing a gap. And that is, what does the machine understand in the middle that makes that wonderful conversation happen? And by doing that process, unfortunately, we've probably baked in some problems which are going to be with the project for a very long time. So we are not our users. We've thought what our users wanted to do. Perhaps we didn't have as much data back then, back 10 years ago, to actually do this. But now Every single call was recorded. We're recording this for training purposes. Yeah, every chat log that's come in over the last decade, all of those cool bot logs are there. Like, our organization's really making use of that data to not bake in what we think we want to do, but listen to what the users are telling us coming in through that channel. And we thought how we would say it, like, how are the users actually saying it? How do you understand that as volume? And that tap of data is like a gushing torrent. We work with customers with literally millions of conversations, a month, so obviously then per year. And how do you listen to that stream and use it to come up with a really structured project quickly? And then we've done responses, and then we've taken it live, and we get frustrated, and clients get frustrated. The CEO types something in and says, blah, 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 blah. It didn't understand me, right? Fix it. And what happens? We say retrain it. We pour lots and lots and lots of data on top of what is already there. And all those biases, all those problems get baked in and get harder and harder to remove. We have clients approaching thousands of tenths and hundreds of thousands of training phrases, even in cloud products such as Dialogflow, and it is very, very hard to deal with there. So really, a lot of the work we do now is helping people strip that back and say, what do you actually need in there? What was your intention? What was your NLU design? What does Dialogflow understand? What's your data showing you? That's what NLU Design does. And we could write NLU, we could write NLG, etc. But fundamentally, we're looking at what problems the users are facing. How do they express that? What's the long tail of that problem? How much of that are we going to try and address? And then we're trying to say, okay, we need to build some ground truth, establish what we mean to the bot, let the bot communicate back to us, what the class is, the prompts, the summarizations, whatever it is that we want. We might need some entities and intents. We might increasingly prompts or searches or fine-tune sets or few shot sets to go and train our technology with. And that's what's going to lead us to have that really great conversational design experience that we want to get to, that will let us set the right tone, because we know that we're going to be basing it off real scenarios, real understanding. The bot understands the same way we are, and then we're going to have a good overall experience. And about this point, somebody's normally saying, like, you're still talking about intents. Why are you still talking about intents? Okay, maybe intents isn't a fashionable word, but agreeing a ground truth with your LLM is perhaps more important than it ever was with these example trained systems. That LLM is so smart and so big, but how do you understand what its concept of something is compared to yours? And we're going to have an example through the practical part of this, of showing you just what a difference, even between quite subtle versions of this technology, that can make, and how you may think that something works once in Playground on OpenAI. Well, does it work out of 1,000 times? How many does it work? How bad are the failure cases? These are very, very tricky technologies. They're very hard to supervise, to stop from hallucinating. How do you do that work at scale? And I'm also going to say that maybe we don't need intents, but we probably need categories, and we probably need classes. And actually, classification and taxonomy is a fundamental logical exercise that's really necessary for business. It's not useful to have, if you've got a million conversations, the LLM treats every single one of those as unique. In fact, it's stochastic, so it's slightly random each time as well. Like, a million classes don't help you summarize that to your boss, right? Like, what's the useful level for this information to be risen up on? And does our understanding of concepts for our personal company agree with whatever's baked in the LLM we're not allowed to see? So, little thoughts experiment. You've used the best technologies you possibly can find, and you've built this amazing bot. And you say, hey, boss, it's brilliant. And he or she goes, that's great. How do you know? I said, oh, we tested it. We tested on our top 20 customer query catalogs. Absolutely brilliant. Okay. How did you know what those top 20 categories were? How significant is that in your overall set of conversations coming into that channel? What happened in the other 80, 90, 95%? How bad are those failure cases? You know, with LLMs, we're moving to a scenario where it is freeform. It is much more uncontrollable than, you know, flow-based fixed responses. We're letting it loose on people now. I see companies doing this. Are you really monitoring it to the level that you need to do to know that before you release, this stuff's covered? Like, what's the worst that could happen? And after you release, like, are you continually monitoring, training, and improving it? So let me reintroduce, I think we introduced at Edinburgh in March this year, 2 key terms, supervision and observability. And that's exactly solving for those 2 problems. Supervising, what is it saying right now to customers? Is that the right thing? And I think conversation designers' jobs move much more to that supervision, that understanding stage in the future. And then observability, and you might write inspectability here, or you might want to say, you know, faith, or maybe belief, or maybe confidence in the system. Like, how do you say it's giving this result, and I know that when it means that, it means the same thing that we do in our company? And again, concrete example of that coming. So I'm going to rely on the chat, but and this isn't a trick question, but can anybody on the chat just say, what's this on the screen? Gorilla. Alina, you're the first in there. Fantastic. It is a gorilla. So I'm going to put this up here so we can see. Gorillas are mammals, is that right? This is a mammal? It's a mammal. So I took my little boy to the zoo. He's not so big. He went up to the gorilla enclosure and he said, look at the big monkeys, Dad. Was he right or was he wrong? Okay, we've got a right for, so gorillas and monkeys. We've got a wrong. We've got 2 wrongs, etc. So I love this one because it's a favorite bit of linguistic pedantries, that gorillas are not, certainly in English, monkeys, they're apes. And actually, that's not so clear cut, right? So this is a Western lowland gorilla. Now, everyone who said gorilla was completely right. It is also a gorilla. It is also a mammal. Let me just look at the next slide. This is the full taxonomy classification for gorillas. So we see mammalia, mammals, we see primates, we see simiforms. Well, the simiforms are the monkeys, simians. So was he really that wrong to call them the monkeys? Yeah, we've got hominids, apes as well, and we've got gorilla. But then actually, underneath that, we've got gorilla. And at the bottom of it, a Western lowland gorilla is gorilla, because we found out that actually gorilla wasn't, in certain circumstances, enough of a finely grained class to actually describe that this is a Western lowland gorilla. I just find gorilla immensely amusing as well. So even when we've been doing something for hundreds of years with classifying animals, people can get upset about, like, are we talking about the right thing here? And like, you need to know when you're doing one of your important business concepts, like, is this a refund or a return? You know, is it payments or charges? Actually, some of this stuff gets really confusing. And it's just as important to have your ground truth established with your LLM as with your traditional intent and entity-based chatbot systems. So NLU Design is really that missing piece that leads to successful projects. And we think we've put together the best tool just for doing that. So a place where you can really work with your partner NLU technology, Dialogflow, Cohere, OpenAI, Rasa, whatever you've picked. Look at those sort of things, like what level of granularity here do we need? If I run a prompt on the whole conversation, how does it react to these classes of conversations? How does it understand these particular concepts? What's better done at the word level with an entity rather than the intent? You know, what are we covering well with the model? What are we covering badly? So I'm going to try and run a little demo now of, some of you may have seen some of our previous demos, so I'm not going to try and do like turn level design. I'm going to say, well, we've got these LLMs. They can do much more powerful things looking at the whole conversation. They can understand much more complex concepts. What's really useful for the conversational designer's tool bag with LLMs to really give a much more comprehensive understanding of what's coming into those channels and what we should build to satisfy those user needs coming back out. And our philosophy is we're going to do that with the real data, and we're going to do it with the actual NLU technology we're going to use. And the philosophy is that a lot of this stuff that we do, it's out there in Jupyter notebooks and, you know, well-described papers, etc. We're just putting it together in an environment which makes that democratized. So, you know, it doesn't require, you know, emailing the data scientist, waiting 3 days, emailing him again or her again, and then getting a response back and then being able to do your work. It's like these things are simpler, understandable, and they're just there at my fingertips in the tool. Okay. So rather than playing a video, we're going to try and actually do some of this live. So this is the Human First tool. And we have got in some conversations from a large fictitious, none of this data is real data. It's from a data set called action-based conversation data set. Of about 90,000 utterances. We've mapped it over 2 months, May and June of 2022. And they serve 10 to 12 major USSCs, and they sell branded jeans, jackets, shirts, those sort of things. And they have a human-to-human chat experience, which they're trying to bootstrap to say, look, we've got all these calls, we want to automate some. Where do we start? How do we build a chatbot that actually says, we're going to answer some of this stuff? So just very quick orientation. We have a model we've brought in here, and we've imported that there. Let me just show you. So we've previously connected it up. I'm using OpenAI and Dialogflow. You could have connected up a variety of other systems. We've imported a draft model that someone started building. We'd have just done this from the integration and then picked whichever agent, and then we have brought it all in. And we can see here that we've got a set of intents. This is Dialogflow CX, someone's been building in. And we've got things that start to look pretty sensible, like I want to upgrade my account. Great, we've got some ground truth here for that. We've got like technical issues, you know, the website's being slow, okay. We've got good examples for the website being slow. You know, we could come here and we could test some of those out. We've also got other things that as conversation designers, you probably know you need, that the bot's going to need to stand yeses and nos and goodbyes and greetings, things that maybe aren't a problem, but need to be there. So there's some that someone started on here. We've got some feedback. We want to measure how the bot's doing. And, you know, immediately we've come in and we've understood, you know, how good is that model? Okay. They've built it in Human First. It's a really high accuracy model. We've only got about 40 intents. Is that enough to satisfy the user? Like, how many intents do we need in a bot? Is it 40? Is it 100? Is it 200? Is it 400? Is it 1,000? Well, you know, a lot of projects get stopped at about 100 to 150 intents. And that's roughly the point where it becomes unmanageable in spreadsheets to try and work out the different training, and the confusion matrices get too big. And unfortunately, that's probably way less of the issues that come in through any channel. Like 300 to 400 is probably the point which you start getting like actually satisfactory bots that have a level of granularity. And like I said, we have seen people easily reaching in the thousands now. And I hear people saying, well, we don't need that with LLMs anymore. Well, maybe you do need some of that with LLMs, and we'll look at how those classes are really helpful for telling you what you need to build and supervise for, and also what directions you need to give in your prompts to LLMs based on the fact that very, very quickly you can understand those 300 or 400 problems that are coming in. I'm not going to go that far today. We've got this data set probably only needs about 70 or 80, but we're clearly not there. We're going to close some of that gap. So that's the model on the left-hand side. And then in the right here, we've got the conversations. And we have this link to about 90,000 data points. It's about 5,000 that's been labeled in the model. And this is about 10,042 exactly conversations. And we can say group them up by conversations, and we can see any of them here. I've picked one at random. Okay, so we can see some of the terms are actually labeled. And we can see that coming in and this person's been double charged. Okay, it's quite a long conversation. Need to ask about their membership levels. Coming through, initiating a return. That's quite a long human-to-human conversation. All right. Okay, it looks like it ended pretty well. It didn't take us too long to read through, but how many of these do people do a day? Conversation review? 1%, 2%? Like, how do we use LLMs to read all of them? You know, what questions do we want answered here? Well, we were already looking at, like, can we start training our model? And probably they're saying that up the top. So maybe in the past we'd have said, okay, look at the first customer utterance. Let's put a filter on that. Okay, what's coming in? Let's cluster it up. Okay, so we've got quick questions, returning items because it's the wrong problem, etc. We've got premium membership questions. Okay, any of these we could really quickly, you know, say we've got username, great. Where does that belong? Oh, great. We've got a password, or we've got username. Right. Okay. Maybe this model needs some improvement because that's not the right way around. You know, what else is in the data set like that? Find everything. You know, we talk about find the needles in the haystacks through, you know, those 90,000. You know, what other training utterances are similar? What other conversations is that necessary? So turn by turn, we could have very quickly built a model, and, you know, prior to LLMs, that was really the primary way people were working, you know, using clustering, semantic similarity to really quickly find at the turn level what was going on in those conversations. Well, I think the really exciting thing for LLMs for me is that you can do that across the whole conversation. What they're really good at is not getting bored reading hundreds and thousands and millions of conversations. And what questions could we get it to answer? Well, if we have a look at like a particular conversation here, let me clear this out. Let's grab a filter on one I noted earlier. So we're just going to filter for a particular conversation ID. And I really like ABCD because it's very representative of real chat data. And that's exciting. Did I note down the wrong ID? Okay. Well, let's go for browse one instead. So they're not always going to say what they want on the very first line. So here's a great example. You know, we've actually got what's happening meaningfully in the conversation later on. So looking at this wouldn't help us. We need to know what happens here and what goes on to happen. And if we're in maintenance mode, we probably want to know which ones are the ones that are well resolved and which ones are not. And we probably want to know for bot building which actions happen in the middle. So, you know, how should we start to look at that, not at the turn level, but at the whole conversation level? So what we can do is say, let's switch across to using prompts to start solving some of this problem. So I suspect everyone on this call has, and if you haven't, it's very fun, has probably logged into Playground and started to think about what prompts we could do. Human First uses that to kind of scale it up from looking at like just one example at a time. You're cutting, pasting, say across the whole data set, how is that representative? And then, can you evaluate that prompt on, yes, the nice ones you thought about, but all the nasty scenarios you didn't think about. How is that going to trip you up in production? So what we've got is a really simple templating language that says for any of these conversations, that's probably a little bit simple. Let's grab that ain't it. So we don't even know what this conversation is about. Let's say, what's the key issue, right? Like perhaps we're solving for like, what's our user need? What's our overall scope that we need to build for? Let's run that for everything. Excuse me, I'm just going to grab some water. So this is going to run down for however many things we put in the stash. So that might be 10, that might be 20, etc. And what we're going to do is we're going to evaluate that run against the LLM. And we can control all the typical things that you can on LLM. Most of the standard settings are pretty good. I'm running on this on GPT-4, a bit more powerful, quite a lot more verbose as well. Good for some things, not for others. And we're going to get a set of data here. So Ryan, I'm just checking, have we got any questions that are coming up already?
Yeah, Stephen, we did have one question. Just when you were touching on the need for sort of a large amount of intents, Tushar asked, why do you need that many examples, that many intents with an LLM when it's so much powerful than, the older intent classifier models?
That's great. Let's have a look at like what we need to agree with the LLM and like really in our business, like how many things do we understand? Because I really feel that a lot of this work goes from just evaluating our conversations to really looking at the end-to-end product, which we're doing, right? If you've got 300 or 400 really important classes of action coming into your system or a problem coming into the system, you probably know about those, and you probably need to start designing some of those out. So actually having a really useful class, it's a great question. Is it 300? And is that useful on that tree? Probably sometimes we need just 10 classes, like what are the big high level areas? What level do we want to look at? Right down to the individual LM, which is looking at every single conversation entirely on its own. I will loop back to that. If I haven't answered it at the end, bring it back up again. Okay, so we have a prompt that is finished. And what we've got here now is a generated statement that says, the key issue is that the client, his contact credit card keeps getting rejected while I try to make a purchase. Okay, is that right or is it wrong? How do we know? Well, the only way we're going to know is to look at that conversation. So let's really quickly look at exactly that generation. And you can see what's happening here is we're just using the templating language to pass that through to the LLM. We can filter on all the different versions and step backwards and forwards. And we've got the source conversation here. And okay, right at the top, my credit card gets rejected when I try to buy stuff. And I go through and various things just did not work. So we probably also want to know, has this been resolved or not? So we ran first one and we got a reasonably verbose one. Maybe we want to say, okay, like, let's try and keep it really punchy and let's try and make some labels we really like. Let's go and get another version of the prompt. And then let's kick this off and let's just try and constrain it to give us really tight answers. And maybe we don't need GPT-4. Let's just kick it off on 3.5 Turbo. So in one I've prepared earlier, one of the things you can do is have Human First generate an entirely derived data set. So here's that data set having run through, so now instead of having 90,000 things to look at, we've only got 10,000 things here to which describe just that key aspect, that key issue. So it's a derived one we can start building a model from. And immediately then we can start clustering them up and working on that next level of insight and saying, well, we can't design for everything. What do we want to decide for? That question. How granular should our classes be? And one of the really nice things is that you can ask it questions, right? Like you can say, okay, we know what our prompt is. You know, what things might be happening. I spilled something down myself earlier, so let me say I've spilled coffee all down my shirt, and I want to split up. Actually, we're on a key issue, so this will be a key issue is that there is coffee all on that. So let's look through and find everyone there. Okay, so we've got people changing their mind, we've got things arriving with stains, we've got colors. So they're all returns, but we've got a variety of returns. And we might want to really quickly grab those together. Let's refresh. Put together a high level intent. And maybe we don't know right now how big returns is going to get. And maybe we'd get stuck if we were doing this in a spreadsheet. But what we can do is just say, you know, within this now, what's the subcategories? And we can have a hierarchical classifier that says, okay, we've got wrong size. We've got refund before ships. And we've got stats. And just very quickly, we can subdivide this down. We've got out of stock. It's fine. Okay, that doesn't actually belong in returns. Let's not put it in there. And we would go through and empty this out. And we could then continue this down as many classes as we want. Again, for the purposes of time, here's what I did earlier. Now, I did the whole of this model last night, ready for this presentation. It took me about two and a half hours to go through and build a really, really nice 70, I said, intent model on that. So, and that's working through originally 90,000 utterances. So if we go and look at that with the issue summary model created, we can now say, okay, how much of our data are we covering? Like, what are the high level classes? So we've got parents, we've got child, intents, we can keep going down for those classes. You know, depending on what our coverage level is, we can slide it back. But, you know, at a 30% level, which is kind of the floor for systems like Watson or Rasa, you know, we would be looking at, you know, having like only 4% uncovered. So when we were looking previously, we were only covering a much smaller percentage of that overall conversation. But now we're looking at key issues. We're saying, okay, we're covering 96% of all key issues that are occurring in my conversations. How much more reassuring does that sound to your boss? And we also now start knowing insight that we've got like, you know, let's do this at 30%. So account issues are 31% of the total. Human first, really, really API-led system. And, you know, I know that people working calls just love a dashboard. So let's turn that into a dashboard in Tableau, Looker, your platform of choice. Pull it down from the APIs. We've immediately got then, okay, this is a breakdown of those high-level issues. Like if you want to monitor your call center now, you've now got a pipeline that says conversation comes in, comes to human first, gets summarized, gets classified. Here's your chart. What's happening right now? Are we getting a spike in promo issues? You know, marketing have launched something and not told us, etc. You know, we can actually understand that whole conversation. You know, what might you do with that? Well, most people have their agents at the end of the course summarize it. That takes a little bit of time. Agents are bad at it. They tend to just take the top category, the next one. Just stop them doing that. Have the machine do it. but you're only going to let a machine write your summaries for all your calls if you're really confident in the data. So we need to test out, is that data really right? And that question on like what levels, well, let's have it as a heat map and say, well, our top level is an account issue, but within that breaks down membership benefits. And then within that, that breaks down and down and down. And let's take it to the granularity we need for the task we're assigning that bot to. So that's showing that we now that we need to have really satisfactory answers for this data set on this channel for at least about 70 or 80 things. Like I said, a lot of live things can be a lot higher. But I think that's one of the missing pieces, that people give a very generic answer to, what are the membership benefits, or maybe, what's the status of my refund, and here's how to get it. But if they're saying, I tried the refund page and it just isn't working right now, it's giving an error, a lot of the time, they just serve the same answer again, right? Like, you need to know that you've got refund people wanting to know how to get a status, but you've got people that follow the process and haven't been successful. Like, understanding that's there and solutioning for it is the sort of things that LLMs are going to be great at, but we need to make sure we're designing the solutions from the start to be able to do. So flipping back into the tool, where we're coming up to where I want to get into more questions.
Stephen, Chris just had a quick question in the chat that should be quick to answer. He was just wondering where the conversations are coming from.
So the conversation will come from this set was, I was showing you Dialogflow being connected in. Dialogflow exports it automatically to the conversational store or to BigQuery. Most companies have a data science, we just pull it in from there. If you're using Rasa, it comes directly from the Rasa tracker, pulls it in. We have some really friendly CSV-based imports, like pretty much however the data comes, we can take it in. But you're streaming it into a folder of conversations here. Normally people bring it in hourly or nightly, depending on that granularity of data they want. And then that's ready for the conversation analyst in the morning to say, let's just look at yesterday, what's new, what's different. And we're really trying to make the conversation analyst day a lot more pleasant. I've been there looking at 1,000 lines in a spreadsheet every day. It gets soul destroying. Like, we can just say, okay, what's the, we've got a model for the chatbot. We've got problems where things have been covered. Show me for, yesterday we put a Delta filter on what the most uncertain clusters are. So we've got lots and lots and lots of dates, which I haven't changed, but there's something about drop-off centers that's pretty interesting. We probably want a solution for that. Are there other people talk about drop-off centers? Absolutely. Okay, this is definitely a big gap in the model. We need to start closing it.
And Chris is just wondering if these specific conversations are from a working bot.
These are human-to-human chats, and they're for something called the ABCD set. So this was a fictitious retailer. There's no PI in here. It's available to everyone to use, but it's really, really very similar to a proper human-human chat. And then the idea here is we're trying to bootstrap that into a bot chat. Obviously, once your bot's live, you'll have live logs streaming in every day from the bot itself, but I can't show you our customers' logs for good reason. Okay, I just wanted to drive out then to try and talk about like observability. So we did some really, really quick prompt work there. And what other things might we want to do? Well, we might want to know like what the actions are that a user took through the conversation. So we can build a data set there. And this is really, really useful for your flows. So for any given conversation, instead of having a conversation which is like backwards and forwards, we've just got the exact things that we need to build. And so we're basically working out the conversational modules that, be it an LLM or be it a traditional flow-based system, we're going to need to handle in order to be able to solve these problems. And is that satisfactory? Well, let's look at, say, resolutions. So we can go through and, apologies, we can go through and have a prompt which says, was the client's issue fully resolved? Please give your answer as yes, no, unclear. Brilliant. Every conversation that's coming through, it's just dead easy, took me 2 seconds to write. We'll know, is it resolved or not? Brilliant. Okay, we get a derived data set, and we've now got every conversation, and we can go through and say, okay, we now know this was not resolved. Okay, great. And I've run it with GPT-3 and GPT-4 here, and both of them agreed. And we'll come to is that important or not. But let's say, find me every conversation which GPT-3 rated as wasn't resolved. And we can look at the conversation and say, okay, wanted to return, it's got a stain on it. Could only be made within 30 days. So it seems to be quite well handled by the user. And we've got people looking at user tone and user objections or sales calls, pretty much anything that you want. But whilst this one was correct, and we're gaining some confidence now, having observed, like, okay, that one works, like, where is it not so confident? So, we can say, okay, well, between like run 1 and run 2, does ever GPT-3 say one thing and GPT-4 say another, if I could type? And the answer is yes, it very, very, very much does. So let me do the summary here. So if you run the whole of that result on GPT 3.5 and GPT-4, you'll find that identical prompts, completely fair circumstances, that about 10% of them are differently classified between the two. And remember, this is a very simple prompt. We're only asking for yes, no, or unclear, right? And more of that, about 4% of those change fundamentally. They're not like, I was a bit uncertain with GPT-3, use a smarter model, maybe it gets it right. It's like, actually, one says yes and one says no. Well, that's crazy. Wow, it's just stochastic. That's just randomness. No, if you run both models against themselves back to back, probably 0.5% variation, like if you keep your temperature settings right, between 3.5 and a 3.5 again. Between 3.5 version 0301 in March and June, that's a different question. You'll see lots of people talking about enormous changes in these models. If these models are changing enormously, they don't tell you, or actually they give you a version, but they don't tell you what's new, what's changed. There's no observability or inspectability within that model. You've got to be able to look at your conversations against what your new LLM chatbot does for that. Otherwise, you can have no confidence in it at all. And if it's suddenly saying no in 10% of cases where it said yes, you should be really, really worried. And this comes back to ground truth. So why do we have that level of variability there? Well, let's look at when we defined our prompt. And he says clicking on the wrong place. This was the prompt I actually ran. We're looking at resolutions. What does fully resolved mean? Right? What does fully resolved mean to me and someone else on this call? It's probably a different concept. Just like that with models. The actual concept of fully resolved, like, would that change drastically if I just say, was this resolved? Was the customer satisfied? Was this a good result? All of these are very, very different concepts, which are probably going to want to start having much, much more specific prompts that actually get you a good answer. So we might want to say things like, I'm just going to copy and paste the text here that I had prepared earlier, is like, rather than just yes, no, unclear, let's define what it means, right? So maybe if the agent answered the question and it wasn't answered, just like we saw with that one there, he wanted to return it, he couldn't. He said, no, it's not resolved. Well, if we ran this, almost certainly we get that would be resolved. If they raised a ticket for the website's still slow. Does that mean the issue's resolved? Yeah, the model might not think so. You probably want to have a set of definition that you understand exactly. And it doesn't matter whether you're using examples to establish a ground truth, or using directives in a prompt to establish a ground truth, it's essential that you understand the same thing that the model does, and you've been able to check that with the real NLU and the real data. Otherwise, you're just not going to turn around to your boss and say, yep, I am 100% confident it's going to do the right thing. You're going to be saying, I don't know what changed yesterday. I don't know what it's going to do. I'm not confident to release this thing. You know, the most successful teams are going to have a space to do this sort of work. And as a product, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to say, you know, we've got people who do fantastic copywriting, fantastic response design, we've got flow design. We've got people who do amazing data science. They talk kind of different languages in my experience. You know, a successful set of team members are going to have a place to discuss what the LLM is doing, you know, in non-technical ways, but ways which can very quickly prove if it's good or bad. And Human First is the tool that really lets you do that. Thank you very, very much, CDI, for letting me talk, and for everyone for listening. I think we have about 10 minutes for questions. If there are any urgent ones as well, Ryan's been writing them down. We'll try and follow up with you as well. I'll open it to the floor.
So we have a couple questions in the Q&A here. So the first one, I don't know if you can see them, but so from Afonso was asking, isn't the conversation design led example in the presentation intro actually a case of bad conversation design? A good design practice would include user research to inform terms and expressions usage. Do you believe LLM is sufficiently autonomous and accurate to dismiss research?
No, I think users research is incredibly important. I just think that people tend to do it without the machine in the room, and they tend to do it without ignoring this big pile of data. So I'm a huge fan of user-centric design, led and taught courses on it. I still think it's crucial. I just think that you can't do that and also ignore what the NLU thinks about those experiences and what the data is showing you, like the success rates and the routes through and what the data is telling you. If you bring both of those together, great user research, great NLU design, you'll have a fantastic project.
Great. And then we had another question from Tushar here. Why do you think that there should be a strict hierarchy of issues? I have seen graph systems used elsewhere.
Sure. It's like you want to get a really complicated ontology, fantastic. One of the reasons I do my demos in Excel is businesses kind of run off Excel. Your boss might need a really simple solution. Taxonomies and hierarchical taxonomies are incredibly useful, and they're incredibly useful at the design time to say, start quick, find the big areas, get your project going in the right direction. Then really look at that next area and say, like, what do we actually need to work on within that? And then you're looking at different dimensions and aspects with the LLMs. We looked at actions and issues and resolutions at lightning speed here. Well, sure, you can start having wonderful Sankey diagrams of like routes through. You can have like huge ontologies like there. But, you know, most of the time, most companies want to know like what's coming into the call center now at a high level, at a granular level, something to go red, please, when it's going wrong. And then, you know, that's why we have large departments in companies, you know, called HR and finance, etc. It's a very, very natural way of thinking. So totally right. Graphs, ontologies, all incredibly useful, but actually hierarchical taxonomies, really, really fundamental to the way people tend to think.
For now, that is all the questions in the Q&A. So if anyone has any other questions, we can give it a few seconds here. Oh, someone popped in here. So Valentina, speaking of observability, did you test the results from OpenAI models? I mean, the difference between GPT-3 and GPT-4 against another LLM.
So I haven't brought those results here. Yes, we have. I think OpenAI's But we have a direct integration with Cohere. We've done a lot of work with them as well. I think there are lots of fantastic providers out there, some really interesting open source projects. A lot of them still take an enormous amount of hardware to run. I think I'm not going to say that one is better than the other. I think it's much like the previous generation, the second wave, where the difference between Dialogflow and Watson and Rasa is probably 2% in really good NLU studies. And there's a huge amount of variability in how you measure that. And also you can find 2% in your training data. In fact, on that study, I could find 10%. So what you do with your LLM is going to be enormously more important than like which particular technology you are working with. I would select your technology based on the consumability, the security aspects, the cost, etc., and then really get used to it. It's going to be changing incredibly fast over the next sort of 2 to 3 years.
Any other questions? Give it a few seconds here. I think your presentation was just so thorough. You left nothing to the imagination here, Stephen.
I bored everyone to death and nobody wants to hear it anymore. Look, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for coming. I've had LinkedIn turned off during this, but I will turn it back on after. If everyone wants to connect and ask something there or through any other channel, I will endeavor to answer. Have a lovely day.